Do you like Mondays?
I like them when they're off.
When the Canadians are off on Monday?
Yes.
That's good. Who sang the song "I Don't Like Mondays"? I don't like. Was it The Cure? Or
no, it definitely wasn't.
no?
It was on a shoot the whole bit. Yeah, I don't remember. But anyhow.
Well, this is Monday, and we've got the Basu and Godin Notebook for you. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. Listen, we've been talking a lot about Cole Caulfield lately. We discussed Suzuki, Slafkovsky, the big guns. But there are other players on this team, and we thought that today we would do a bit of supporting cast special, looking at guys that we talk about less often, that are not having as major roles on the team, but who are worth talking about because of their performances. So I think Joel Armia is an interesting case for discussion today.
Yeah. Before we go on, it's the Boomtown Rats that's saying I don't like Mondays. Yeah. And yeah, Joel Armia is a very interesting case because of the way his season began, being put on waivers, being sent to the AHL, coming back, going back to the AHL, coming back again. A guy in his situation, a guy in his, it's not as if he's had like a stellar NHL career, but he's an NHL veteran player. Could have reacted to that entirely the wrong way. Could have taken that as a sign that this team doesn't want me. Why should I bother playing for them? Whatever. Didn't do any of that, and has really come out the other side. And like over the last month and a half, like a decent sample, I would say he's been, aside from the three guys you mentioned, probably their best forward. I mean, consistently, like on a consistent basis. And so, the other night, Saturday night, Capitals get a penalty. Marty St. Louis pulls his goalie. First power play unit goes on. Plus, Joel Armia is the sixth guy on the ice in that situation. On the bench is Josh Anderson. Our colleague Eric Engels asked Marty about that on Sunday after the Canadians practiced on a Sunday. Was that a bit of a message to some of the other guys who could have been used in that situation? And without, Marty didn't disagree with that there's a spot there to be had, and it'll go to the one who earns it. And the one who earned it was Joel Armia. And I don't think anyone could argue with him. And so,
no, it was not even the first time that he did that.
No,
I think it's the second or third time that he uses him at 6-on-5. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been, and what Armia's improved play has allowed, given the Canadians, is another viable line. Alex Newhook deserves his share of credit for how he's played coming off a lengthy absence, a 10-week absence. And Joshua Roy, I feel, doesn't look out of place on that line.
No.
And so that's a second line that the Canadians can reasonably expect to drive some positive results. I think Joel Armia is a big part of that. I think he's the expected goal share leader by a country mile on the team over the last 4 or 6 weeks, last time I checked.
Yeah.
Because you look at the Evans line with Pearson and Anderson, they go to New York and have a great game. Fantastic. Josh Anderson probably his best game in weeks, and then on Saturday, they're invisible.
Yeah.
It's the ghost line. So I think Armia has been a really good story. It's unfortunate he's so kind of media averse, and the media are so Armia averse as a result. Because I did ask to talk to him after a game. I think it was actually the last time he was out on the 6-on-5. I forget what game that was, but we did ask to speak to him, and he didn't come out.
No.
I mean, I don't know if that's on him. I would guess that was just a case of either PR just kind of forgetting to get him, or maybe he just didn't want to. But It's unfortunate because I think like his story is worth telling. And are you going to permit me a little aside here?
Sure, right. Go right ahead.
Since I've been talking for so long already, but I remember I think it was a year ago. I think it was last year. Armia was going through a bit of a tough time, and I sat down with him after a morning skate, and he was actually in the mood to talk. And he talked about how, mentally, it was really challenging. He was very challenged mentally to try and maintain the level of play that earned him the contract that he had to try. And he was making use of some of the performance, the psychological performance resources the Canadians make available to the players. He was speaking to their sports psych about it, and really seemed committed to trying to get past this. Because I also remember speaking to Yuri Lettinen one time when he was in Montreal, and he was kind of scouting for the Finnish national team for World Championships. And I asked him about whether he thought Armia had a shot, or whether he's considering him. He's like, yeah, definitely considering him, but just need him to get his head like on straight, like it's just like, and so it really is a challenge for him sometimes to not get too down on himself and not sort of be his worst enemy in that sense. I remember Mike Matheson once said, like, everyone looks at him and thinks that he doesn't care. I can tell you that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, it's the exact opposite. So this notion that Armia is this aloof guy that sort of goes through the motions and doesn't care is I think untrue. And I think we're seeing it now. Like this is the result of a lot of work on his part and a lot of commitment and a lot of swallowing his pride and just doing it. And I think he should be commended for it.
Yeah, that's something that makes this story particularly interesting, is that towards the end of the last season, you used the expression his own worst enemy. That's exactly the expression that he used towards the end of the season when I spoke to him, and he said, too many times, I'm my own worst enemy and I'm being too hard on myself. And that's one thing I need to learn, to try to play more relaxed. And after starting the season in the AHL, you could imagine that the guy would be buried in his head deeper than at any point. And yet he came out of it. And I think that on that same night that didn't come out after you had requested to talk to him, that's the night that Martin Saint-Louis said something very interesting. That's really a glimpse into his psyche. He said, I think Army's just in a good place. I think he's found joy playing this game at this level with everything the game is asking him to do, what the game brings. I think because of that, he's found some consistency. And that's one thing with Armia, is because, we've been going on for years, you and I, on Twitter about the Armia things, the little moves that show his creativity and the uniqueness that he brings as a player. But those glimpses of genius used to be like really scattered, and sometimes you see it pop up and say, aha, here's an Armia thing. But the rest of his game would be totally mediocre, and on some nights he would be brilliant, on others he would completely disappear. So consistency, it's hard to find for any player, but for this guy in particular, I mean, it's been his kryptonite his whole career, and he's about to turn 30. So I wonder if a guy who's at that age can finally figure it out. And if he can, man, that's awesome for the guy.
It's found money for the Canadians too. I mean, this is the guy that they consider to be not worthy of their opening night lineup. I mean, I think there were some cap considerations in there, but I think, if he had made himself indispensable to them, that they wouldn't have cared about the cap considerations. Speaking of Armia things, actually, it was funny. The other day I was talking to Sam Montembeault about Armia. Yeah. And I told him the photo hole story. He thought it was the funniest thing ever. It's just, I don't know if you remember this, but he was...
Photo hole.
Yeah, they were... one day the Canadians were practicing at the Bell Center. And this was before they did morning skates at the Bell Center. It might have been the team photo day or something. But anyhow, so a bunch of players after practice had decided that they were going to do a game where they're going to try and shoot the puck into the photographer's hole in the glass, in the corner. Yeah. And so they're doing it forever, like 5-10 minutes. They're trying. Armia skates over, just for our listeners now that you remember the story, but Armia skates over, grabs the puck, first shot, boom, right in the photo hole, skates away, like mic drop, goodbye. Everyone's like just amazed. And Monty was laughing quite hard when he heard that. He's like, yeah, that sounds like him. That's basically his deal. Like he just has otherworldly skill. Yeah. And the combination side, like that's what makes people so frustrated about him, is that you look at him and you see him do these things. You see him operate in tight quarters. You see him win puck battles consistently. You see his size along the walls, everything. You see the entire playoff run in 2021. And you're like, man, this guy could be a difference maker. You know, he could really be something. So
that's what Bergevin thought when he signed him to that contract.
That's what Bergevin thought when he signed him to that contract. And so, now, like, he's got a year left on his deal. It's at $3.4 million. You know, we're talking a lot about David Savard being available for trade. I'd be surprised if a team would be willing to take on that money at the deadline. But if Armia plays this way till the end of the season and he gives scouts like a good, 3-month sample of this kind of play,
yeah.
Him getting moved at the draft is not inconceivable, but honestly, like if he plays this way, letting him play out his contract is not inconceivable either. Like he's like a good NHL body for the Canadiens right now, which is they need these. They need guys like this. But he's just become a factor again for this franchise, the way he's played for a considerable amount of time. It's not it's not just a flash. Like this is a good chunk of time, and let's see if he can keep it up. But if he can, then he becomes an interesting asset for the organization.
It's not as though he's setting the world on fire, though, statistically speaking. He's got 5 goals and 3 assists in his last 18 games. And that's offensively, that's his best push of the season. But it's just that if you pay attention.
I bet you that total, without even looking, I bet you that total would put him 5th on the team in scoring over that span. Without even looking, I bet you after the top line and Matheson, he'd probably be the next scorer. That's the thing.
That's pretty much the year since the new calendar year. So it's something happened in his head, I guess. But yeah, I mean, so 5 goals, 3 assists is not amazing, but a team paying attention to what he's bringing and the fact that he's bringing it more consistently might pay some interest. But our friend Laurie Bennett was asking us through via Twitter, which team do you think would be the best fit as a trade partner for Armia? Who needs what he brings that also has a right combination of cap space and salary dump to make a deal work? Well, as you said, I mean, prior to the deadline, it's going to be tough because that's where a support player like him with his contract, teams that can add that sort of money will have ample choice of the sort of player that they want to bring. Would Armia be their first choice? I don't know.
Not at that number. No way.
No, and I'm not sure the Canadiens. The Canadiens probably would rather keep him for another year, until at least the beginning of next year, rather than retain money on the salary. So you can just play his contract out.
I don't think. Yeah.
Otherwise, but I could see him fit in Edmonton though. Not because 100%. Of Corey Perry, but because that's a team that traditionally plays a rather heavy style. They know that they have to play a heavy style, but at the same time, he has the wheels to follow the quicker guys. Great at cycling, and you look at their bottom 6. They could use some bodies there because it's not. I'm not sure if they'll get into the playoffs with Sam Gagner and Matthias Janmark and Derek Ryan and guys like that and say, we're sure of where we're going with that. Armia, I mean, it can be very effective. He can play on your PK and whatnot. But there are certain teams that could add an Armia, but A, what do they have to offer? B, can they fit in under the cap?
Well, the Oilers definitely can.
Well, there's also the fact that some teams they might want to add a guy, add his salary, but next year you have to consider also who are the guys that a certain team needs to re-sign. If let's say Florida could also use a very good bottom six guy, but they've got so many blue liners to re-sign that they're not going to invest any sort of cap space on a bottom six guy for next year, considering that they have to sign all those guys. So it makes it very, very tricky to conceive a trade involving Joel Armia prior to the summer.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even I think of a team like Colorado, who just added Zach Parise to sort of shore up their bottom six, and they could use a guy like him. But they are, according to Cap Friendly, have $466,000 of Gabe Landeskog's $9 million LTIR money left to them. Or actually, sorry, the combination of Gabe Landeskog and Pavel, I can never say his name.
Francouz,
yeah. Yes. Which is obviously the rumored destination for Jake Allen, which was news to Kent Hughes. But in any case, that was a funny day for him, I think. But they could use someone like Jake Allen, a goaltender of some sort. So I think that would be their priority. So yeah, I don't think the chances of them moving Armia before the deadline seem pretty remote. I don't even know if they want to. I mean, but I mean, the point being that credit to Joel Armia for making this even a conversation. It wasn't even something that we would consider being even remotely possible in November.
But do you buy his stock in the sense that, it's a similar conversation to what we were discussing around Jonathan Drouin for years. If only his skills could translate more effectively into a game on a nightly basis, if he could be more consistent, etc. Do you believe that finally that version that we've seen so far in the past 6 or 7 weeks can be sustained and he can become that player on a regular basis? Or it's just one good streak and ultimately we're bound to go back to typical Joel Armia?
Well, I think the one thing that I would be leery of if I was a team acquiring him is that he would again fall into that trap of putting too much pressure on himself. Oh, this team went out and got me. They want me. They bring me in. They see me as an important player. And then he starts to let his own expectations of himself crush him. I think it's no coincidence that he's playing this way because no one's expecting anything from him. He's playing this way coming off a demotion to Laval. He's almost a forgotten figure.
Yeah.
He was almost a forgotten figure in the organization, and that sort of freed him to just play. And that's what he's doing. And, that quote you read from Marty that he mentioned, the joy of playing at this level and all this, if a team were to trade for him, he came in as some sort of, desired asset, and there's expectations on him again and what have you, external expectations, who knows how he would react. Every time he's been faced with a situation like that, when he was first traded to Montreal, when he signed his contract, these are sort of benchmarks of when Armia kind of faded in and out of relevancy. Even his playoff run, I mean, he was on a fourth line. I think that had a lot to do with it. It was a very good fourth line, and could argue that fourth line was a driving force in the Canadiens being able to get through those playoffs. But still, fourth liner, and he performed. So that would be my one. That would be my one concern if I was going out and trading for him. Is how's this guy going to react to a team wanting him and bringing him in as a guy that's important to them?
All right. Speaking of fourth liners, Michael Pezzetta. That's another guy who's on a good streak. Certainly not statistically, but he's a lot more visible on the ice. And it's funny because last year, probably around the same time, just around the turn of the new year, the minute that he got to play with Alex Belzile, it seems as though his season took off and he had a much better second half than the first half. This year...
He barely played in the first half. He was a healthy scratch almost the whole first half.
Not a whole first half. I would say
Almost.
probably until mid-November, probably. But yeah, he was healthy scratch more than his fair share of time at the beginning. But he couldn't get it going at first, and he was struggling to find his identity. He was trying to, he was mixed with players like Mike Hoffman and Yevgeny Dadonov, all the spare parts that ended up on the fourth line. And now it's not for a lack of fourth line caliber sentiment that he's had so far this season, but he was not playing like that with Mitchell Stephens. But now since Brendan Gignac was called up, his last 6 games, all of a sudden things are going super well for him. If you dig into the the fancy stats, I mean, in the last 6 games, his expected goals for percentage is above 50%, which is in the 10 games
for him.
before,
Yes,
I know. In the 10 games before, it was at 28.5. So it's awesome for him. He needs to be that guy who just pushes the pace, makes sure that just things are happening on the other end, far away from his net, that he's hard on the forecheck. But more than that, also, he's making more plays with the puck. He's a lot more active. And I don't know if it's because he benefits also from the speed of Gignac, but it feels like the tempo overall of that line has been very interesting. And
made more so by the inclusion of Brendan Gallagher.
Well, it gives you a line that brings you a bit of everything, right? So
that's it.
Because Gignac has got a defensive acumen to him. Gallagher will be the guy driving the net, and Pezzetta can play F1 all day long. So I feel as though there's more. When Martin St. Louis was saying that there was more to his game, I don't know if there's more to his game than what we've seen so far. But it's nice to see that what he can bring right now, he's finally bringing it on a bit more consistent basis too.
Yeah, and that's the relationship between Marty St. Louis and Michael Pezzetta has been a fascinating one to me from almost day one, but really, definitely since the beginning of last season. Like when I mentioned that Pezzetta was a scratch for a long time, I forget how long, but as a result of being a scratch, he spent a lot of time with Marty on the ice after morning skates, getting extra work in. Back when Marty used to do that, he hasn't actually done that a whole lot this year, or at all. Really, he gets off the ice pretty quickly after morning skates, actually. But we used to have to wait 30, 40 minutes after a morning skate to talk to Marty because he was out there working with the scratches, and that was invariably Michael Pezzetta. And so, I think there's in that work, there's a certain trust that was built between them, like just his willingness to adapt and to learn new things and to apply them to his game. It's, well, first off, I'll tell you this. I guess I'll tell the listeners. I don't know if maybe you've heard this story, but I talked to Michael Pezzetta Saturday morning before the game about his resiliency this season. He has not been out of the lineup that often. In fact, he's been in the lineup every game since December 28th. So, and there's been chances to get him out of the lineup, and he seems to stay there. And so I asked him about it and whether it stems from that time, spending all that time with Marty. And he actually mentioned the first meeting he had with Marty after he took the job. So this is 2 seasons ago. Marty called him into the video room and showed him a clip. The clip was of Pezzetta getting the puck in his own end, chipping it off the glass and sending it out into the neutral zone, where he had a teammate sort of slashing and heading in that direction. And he's like, so Marty asked him, what do you think of this play? And Mike was like, well, I don't know. It's an okay play. It's decent. It's not bad. And Marty was like, no, it's not bad, but it's not, it's not the best play. We've heard Marty talk about that all the time. It's not the best play that you can make. Here are the other things. I'd like you to just look and see these other options and what have you. And Mike was like, this was the first time a coach had ever told me not to do what I just did. The first time a coach ever told me not to chip it off the glass and get it out, just to expect more from him. And so what he said is, and Mike said this has stayed with him ever since this meeting. He said, yeah, you did your job, but you're surviving. This is a survivor's play. You need to start living. That survivors only survive for so long in the NHL, but guys who live, they can stay. And so it was an interesting window into sort of how Marty views this player. And, and we've seen him talk about Jake Evans this way. We've seen him talk about other players where he's like, there's more there than you see. But in Pezzetta's case, it's like, and this is what Pezzetta said, is that what I offer is that you know exactly what you're getting from me. And that could be true in a positive way or a negative way, but he views it as a positive that, I'm going to be hard on the forecheck. I'm going to be responsible. I'm going to play hard, and I can be physical if need be, but I'm not. And this is kind of the point I made to him is that, and I don't know if you agree, but you watch Michael Pezzetta's game now, he's not just running around trying to hit people. Like it used to be, that was his MO when he would get on the ice. It's like, I'm just going to hit as many people as I can. He still hits a lot of people. He's among the league leaders in hits. And he still fights people, but he's not always doing that. And he kind of said that I've started to realize when the time is right for that and when you just have to go play. And his ability to just go play is what Marty kind of respects in him, because the fact that he can consistently stay in the lineup over Jesse Alonen, I know a lot of fans are frustrated by that, and frankly, I don't blame them to some extent. But a consistent concern for Marty with Jesse Alonen has been his details away from the puck. He said the same thing on Saturday when asked about it, that the details away from the puck are lacking, and that they need to improve. And I think Pezzetta's got that, at least in Marty's eyes. What he lacks in skill compared to Alonen, he makes up for in reliability.
Marty uses often the expression to be on top of the opponent. That's one detail of the game that Alonen doesn't have. He's not on top of the opponent. He doesn't close in on the puck carrier. He's not on the puck. He watches the puck carrier. He doesn't figure out where the puck is going to go, and positions himself accordingly. He doesn't apply enough pressure. So that makes him a very easy guy to beat defensively. So if you only wait until your team has the puck to turn on the switch, that's not going to cut it, And it's weird because he's got the speed to close in fast on guys. He's got the physical aspect, but he doesn't win his battles again along the boards. He's got those tools, those raw tools that should enable him to do that, but he doesn't. So after that, the fact that he's a much better skater than Pezzetta, that he carries the puck much better, that he has a much better shot, all those things, everybody can see that. But if you do not do what's necessary, and when Marty says, the defensive part of the game, that's not fun, but that's necessary. If he doesn't do all those things, he'll never earn his coach's trust. So Pezzetta on his end might not, he do some of those things a lot better, but the overall quantity of what he can bring is probably more limited. But he's got one thing going for him, and it's the fact that his identity and his player profile is in scarcity among the Montreal Canadiens roster and even in their old system. So I don't know if things are going to change if they're able to sign Luke Tuck. If Luke Tuck wants to come to Montreal and sign with them, I don't know. But if he does sign and he comes to Montreal, that's competition potentially for Pezzetta. If Lucas Condotta Lucas Condotta continues to intrigues management, that's competition for him. Because ultimately, talent-wise, he's not a top 12 forward on this team, but it's just that he's got a niche that he's got to exploit. So what I want to see from Pezzetta, and I think that we've seen it lately, is how indispensable can he become in his own style of play that's proper to him. Can he play in a way that he will force Martin St. Louis to keep him in the lineup? Not just that he's going to be kept in the lineup over some other guy who's not deserving enough, but that his own play, even if other guys were healthy, he would still be there because he deserves it so much. So that's the point I think that he needs to reach.
Yeah, and that's, and frankly, listen, the situation is what it is. He's not going to be, we were talking, I think, last episode or in a recent episode about, who are the guys who are going to be here when the team is good. I don't think Michael Pezzetta is one of those guys. He's here now, but what he can do is he can create, he can create an identity as a guy who can play that role, especially if he can start to be used on the penalty kill, which he's starting to a little bit. And for the time being, he's useful to the Canadians, until they get to that point where they have reached the future, where the future is the present. He's a good bridge guy who can play in the NHL, and that's something he mentioned. He's like, I've proven I can play in the NHL on a consistent basis. I feel like I've done that. And I feel like he has. He's not just a scrapper, and he's not just an energy guy. He does other things.
It's if I go back to the first few years where I was covering this team consistently, I think that he's gone from being Gregory Stewart to on his way to becoming Tom Kostopoulos. But he's not Tom Kostopoulos yet. And he could be, because Kostopoulos played over 600 games in the NHL and played a ton in the AHL. Yeah, a ton in the AHL. I think he's one of the few guys who had 600 in both leagues. He had a letter on his jersey. He played a ton of PK, which, again, that's another way for Pezetta where he could show himself to be useful. Yeah. But I think that's the profile. That's a profile of player that he should look up to, and to become that sort of player.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so it's, and I think he also has that self-awareness, he knows his place, he's, and he also kind of recognized that it doesn't matter if I play 7 minutes. I can still go out and play those 7 minutes and you'll know what you'll get from me. It's not going to affect me that I'm sitting on the bench for a long time. You can bench him in the third. It's not going to be an issue. He's not going to be upset about it. He's not going to, and then he's just aware of what he has to carve out. So, so good on him. And yeah, that's you're right to point out the second year in a row where this kind of period of the season is where he sort of solidifies his role. But I do think, Jesse Ylönen's got to sort of pick it up. I think it's the coach is starting to get frustrated with the fact that it's the same issues. He's given the same answer to explain why Ylönen doesn't get more ice time for months. And if you don't see improvement in something that you've clearly identified as a problem, then you're going to start to, you're going to stop giving the benefit of the doubt because you're not seeing improvement in areas that they're clearly working on with him. And so, because the skill set's interesting to be something, but it's tough to do that when you're not showing, when you're showing making the same mistakes over and over again, basically.
Yeah.
And I agree with your sentiment about not being on top of people, but it's also that he just doesn't engage in battles the way he needs to. It's like and sometimes he flat out avoids them. So it's something worth working on.
He should look more at Arber Xhekaj. If he had more Arber Xhekaj to his game, he'd be a completely different player.
To his game as a countryman, to make a Finnish comparison. If he had more Lehkonen in his game, he would go far, but he doesn't right now. And to be fair to Jesse Ylönen, he has always been cast as an offensive player on any team he's played on. He's always been a power play guy. He's always been a top six guy. He's been a guy who's there to produce offense. The other areas of his game were never really called upon. So, but they're being called upon now. It's been a significant amount of time where he's been told that he needs to work on certain things, and he's not getting there. So I think he needs to get the message.
Yeah.
Another guy we want to talk about today in the supporting Best Actor in a Supporting Role episode is Arber Xhekaj. Xhekaj is another guy, talking about Armia and his head. Arber Xhekaj is a guy who's had, I think it would be fair to say that his season has been confusing to him. He's had, he had a great rookie year. The world was his oyster. His town was his oyster. He was just loving life. I'm a defenseman on the Montreal Canadiens. I didn't play a second in the AHL. I wasn't drafted, and look at me now. I've made it. And he didn't want to fully agree with that assessment of how he approached it, but I think it would only be natural to feel that in some way. And that's not to suggest that he'd stopped working or whatever, but I think it would have been fair for him to assume that this season was going to be an improvement on that he would be progressing. And that just doesn't happen on its own. And so,
he took things for granted.
I don't know if he took things for. I don't think he consciously took things for granted.
He said as much. So
well, yeah, it's he did. Yeah, you could take an NHL role for granted, but I don't think he because it sounds bad when you. And I think the way he said it, it's not that he stopped working. It's not that he showed up to camp unprepared. I think take things for granted can somehow have a different connotation than what he means by it. I think what he means by it is that he considered himself an NHL player, and that was that, and so, and when problems started to hit, it was difficult to handle because of that. And so here he is now, and he's still not a finished product, and he's still working on things, but, Marty mentioned that he's seeing progression, which is a good sign for Xhekaj. I talked to him, I think it was when they play the Cap, Saturday. So yeah, I talked to him Saturday morning.
Yeah.
And, he mentioned just a couple of things in his defensive game that have improved. He found that he's not being as aggressive going to hit people along the wall. He found that when he was doing that, guys were kind of saw him coming and were spinning off him and beating him that way. And so he didn't see that happening as much. There's a couple other, gap control, things like that. And he felt like he's been making progression. And I asked him if, he got into that fight against the Ducks, that huge guy on the Ducks, Johnson. What's his name?
Ross.
Ross. Yeah. And I asked him if that kind of felt good, he more than held his own. Ross Johnson's a massive human being and more than held his own. He's like, yeah, it did actually. It kind of felt it's been a while since I'd gone at it with a real heavyweight, and it's part of my identity. And I have to find the balance between that and being physical, but also playing the game and being defensively sound. And kind of admitted that balance has been hard to find for him all season. And so that's something that bears watching. And it's funny, like when he mentioned guys spinning off him that night, the Capitals' winning goal was Max Pacioretty had the puck, wasn't against the wall. That's an important distinction because I'll tell you in a bit, but he has the puck kind of the side of the slot. Xhekaj goes after him, and Pacioretty spins off him, sends it to Protas in front, easy goal. Someone should have been on Protas, let's be clear. That was, but so I asked after the game, I asked Xhekaj, I was like, was that what you were talking about? Like that play? He's like, no, not that play. Like that I'm talking about specifically on the wall. He's like, on that play, I'm trying to force Pacioretty back towards the blue line, which is what I did. And then he just made a good play and he did spin off me, but that's not what I was referring to. So, but still, moments like that are happening. He needs to tighten those up a little bit, but I think he's aware of it. And I think his head is in a better place now, or a more reasonable place now than maybe it was in October.
Yeah, and the game before against the Rangers, also the Rangers' fifth goal, I think it became sort of the backbreaker on that game when he was caught flat-footed at the blue line, and it was that on Trocheck's goal.
Trocheck's goal, yeah. It was Trocheck's goal at the start of the third, and Marty after the game, and Marty the next day identified that goal as the one that killed them in that game. So So
But at the same time, when he says that he wants to balance, his physicality with the defensive play, the standout play of that second period on Saturday was his hit on Dowd, on Nick Dowd. So it was when he punishes opponents and discourage them from going on his side. That's part of who he is. But we brought it up in an earlier podcast that to me, he needs to be defensively sound to go with that physicality, because the physicality alone is not going to be enough to really. Well, he might be feared by opponents, but ultimately they might find ways around him where if he becomes steady in his own end, I think that's his ticket to probably potentially a top 4 role in the NHL, a lot more than his Uber slap shot that led to a goal the other night.
102.2. 8th hardest shot taken in the NHL this season.
Yeah. An insane slapper. So that's great. That's part of his toolkit. But I still believe that he'll have to find more of a defensive component to his game rather than hope that his offensive skills will carry his play.
Well, what he's looking for is a marriage. When he was focusing solely on his defensive game, his physical game went completely absent. And when he focuses on being physical, that's when he takes bad penalties and that's when he makes defensive mistakes. So you can't be either or. It can't be one or the other. It has to be a marriage of both. The offensive tools are going to be there, and I think the Canadians like his offensive tools. That's what makes him unique. But the marriage of the physicality and the defensive responsibility, or just adhering to certain defensive principles while being that physical guy, is the trick for him, and that's what he's been grappling with all season. I think he'll get there. I really don't think it's
Sure.
an issue. He's a younger player. He's in his second year as a pro. I think he'll get there, but it's definitely that's the struggle for him right now is being able to do both at once and do it efficiently. And so, when
we talked about the Canadians' young core the other day, imagine in 2-3 years with more experience and probably fine tuning these different aspects of his game, I think that he can really be I won't say dominant defenseman, but very, very effective defenseman, and never be a liability the way that he's been at times this year. Right now, it's just a sophomore slump. Let's call it what it is, and it affects 1/3 of the second-year players. It's a common phenomenon for various reasons. There's not only things that he might have perceived that he was doing okay and needed to work more on or whatever, but there's also the fact that the leagues know you more, and you don't catch anybody by surprise in your second time around. But I think that with more reps in 2 to 3 years, the Canadians are going to have a good one. And for all those who say, there's no room on that defense for both Xhekaj and Struble, wait a minute. I'm sure they would like to find a way to have both of them at the same time.
Well, first of all, let's see what happens with Struble. Yes, he's had a great rookie year. He's been very excellent all year. We were saying the same things about Arber Xhekaj a year ago, so let's see what happens. And the thing about Xhekaj is that he is the exact type of player you win with in the playoffs. This is a guy who is the prototype of a playoff style defender, if he can learn to defend. But the physical component, the size, when the standard drops in terms of what you can get away with and what you can't, he should be able to thrive in that environment. You think back to, I'm not comparing him to either of these guys because I think his feet are better and his offensive tools are better. But Sherratt and Edmondson, you think back to that D, and you look even now, why are teams bending over backwards to try and get Chris Tanev? It's that style of defender that you like. Why is there a possibility David Savard will get traded? That style of defender, and so I think Xhekaj's got more more mobility and better feet. But if you can have good feet and play that style of defense, makes you a very, very marketable player. And I think the Canadians are happy they have him. So I think there's a lot of consternation about how the Canadians feel about Arber Xhekaj, and I think it's misplaced. I think they see a lot in Arber Xhekaj, and they see exactly what I just mentioned, is that when we're ready to be a playoff team that's ready to go and win playoff series, this guy's going to help us do that. And they just need to get him to that point.
But let's agree, he'll never be Kristanev, though.
No, probably not. Probably not. But he'll be a different. I look at Braden McNabb in Vegas.
Oh, yeah.
I think he could be a guy like him.
Right.
And that guy, let's agree, like in a 7-game series, you don't enjoy playing against him. It's just not fun.
No, you're right. And I mean, McNabb he's a guy who, I mean, he's found his niche. But let's not forget that when he was in LA before, and at some point, LA was not too enamored with him, and they eventually moved him.
Well, there's the warning.
Actually, they didn't move him. He was claimed in the expansion, but yeah, that's it. At some point, you just let those guys. Give those guys some time to flourish and perfect their game. Mm-hmm. And right now, that's the incubator in which those players are in Montreal. So
yeah.
Okay, let's move to our mailbag. Otherwise, did you have something else to add on?
No, I think it's a good time for the mailbag.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. As usual, we have 2 ways to be reached. So you can email us at basuandgodin@gmail.com, and also on Twitter or X at just Basu and Godin. That's the account for the show. So thanks everybody for the questions. They were again numerous. So Arpin, why don't you lead us with the first email question?
Yeah, sure. So this was actually kudos to Matt Crawford in Winooski, Vermont, who sent us a question on email and on Twitter. So we were definitely going to see it, Matt. So here it is. And so in 2024-25, the Habs are expected to be one step closer in their rebuild, and we'll expect to see growth in the players. There's an expectation of growth in the coaching staff as well. In the same way that C-suite executives undergo leadership training in business, you could assume the Canadiens coaching staff might benefit from having experienced experts assist the franchise as it progresses into the next phase. Is there a sense the Canadiens may be in the market for a special assistant coach with playoff coaching experience next season? If so, who are some of the likely candidates the Habs are likely to consider? To that end, what areas does the current coaching staff need to improve upon to ensure a positive outcome in the rebuild? Good question, Matt. Thank you. This is something we've talked about, and this is something that is legitimately a thing. I guess I could share a story, conversation I had on Saturday where,
you talked to a lot of people on Saturday.
Yeah, I had a busy day on Saturday. This was actually during the game, and I was talking to someone, scout, and he asked me like, who coaches the PK for the Canadians? I was like, Stéphane Robida. It's like, might want to look into that. I was like, well, it's not my job, but it's you see certain things where a veteran voice might be required. I think there's certain moments in games even where Marty is maybe between two decisions, where he's still kind of fine tuning his game management, his tactical adjustments, things like that. Hasn't done it in a playoff series. I think we've talked about it. Like, we don't know what that's going to look like. Martin St. Louis coaching a playoff series. He could be great. He could be not great. And frankly, based on rookie coaches going to the playoffs for the first time, or young coaches going to the playoffs for the first time, usually it's not great. Usually you gotta take some lumps and learn. And that's nothing against those coaches. I mean, I think John Cooper made mistakes, when the Lightning first started to sort of contend. I think that first time they were in the Stanley Cup final, I think I remember I wrote a story once about him in crunch time of I think it was game 5. I don't remember, but it was a critical game in the series. In the last 12 minutes of the third period, Steven Stamkos had the same ice time as Cedric Paquette. And I was like, It's not ideal. It's like really not the way you want to do that. He didn't like that story, for the record, but it's something that you learn as a young coach. The playoffs are different. You can't manage them like you would manage a game in November. The one name that he actually suggested is he said kind of, like a Dave Tippett type would be nice to sort of add to the mix on the bench. I don't know the extent to which the Canadians are looking at that, but I do think that they're aware that they have a very inexperienced group behind the bench. They like their group, but there's an awareness, and I don't know if they're going to address it at all. And if they do, if they will do it this off season or not. But I do think there's a general level of awareness that this is an area that might need to be addressed at some point.
Well, what I find surprising is that when St. Louis arrived, he didn't think it was something that needed to be addressed. And now that next year he'll be into his third full season with the Montreal Canadiens, with more experience, you probably think even less than before that he needs to surround himself with more experience. Let's not forget that when Luke Richardson left for Chicago, the Canadiens considered different options. They went with Stéphane Robida. They had an opportunity there to add some experience. They looked at different guys, and eventually they chose to hire Robida. But it was surprising to me. It remains puzzling, to say the least, because
I have a theory behind that.
What is it?
My theory is that they were not in a position to win. They had a young team with young players, and I think they thought that the fit with young coaches learning alongside these players was a good fit. But I don't think that means that's how they would view it when they're ready to compete. And I think I've mentioned it already. I would not be surprised this offseason if the Canadiens started making some moves like the Red Wings have made in the last couple of off seasons, which were kind of puzzling from the outside. The David Perron signature, going after Andrew Kopp, JT Compher this offseason, being really active in free agency to kind of add these, I don't want to call them fringe, but not core elements, but sort of veteran pieces that'll help you win games. And so far, Detroit's going much better in Detroit than it is in Buffalo and Ottawa. And so you can't totally discount the value of what they did. So maybe when the Canadiens do that, this is something they might address at the same time. I don't know, but I haven't heard anything suggesting the Canadiens are looking to do that. I haven't heard anything suggesting the Canadiens are unhappy with the coaching, but the youth of their coaching staff is definitely something they're aware of. Yeah.
So I know that Letowski and Burrows, or is it Letowski and Eric Raymond? But some assistant coaches, their contracts are up at the end of this year. It's not the case.
Raymond's contract is up at the end of this year. Yes.
Yeah. So Letowski too. Letowski. Somebody else was asking us on Twitter about Letowski. It was Riley Montreal. They were wondering what was his role with the Canadiens. Basically, it's not too different from what Dominique Ducharme was doing under Claude Julien, which is acting more like a sounding board. But he's also doing a lot of pre-scouting, so analyzing other teams' tendencies so that they prepare properly for their opponents. So Letowski's big into that. But he's a guy that also...
Which Ducharme did as well. Ducharme did that too. Yeah.
So he was brought in by Ducharme. And Martin St. Louis, having no network and coaching already, he was brand new to this. So he said, I'm going to keep the same staff. But if he was to look for somebody else, I wonder if he would not bring someone who's more into the philosophy of USA Hockey. Because I feel like Martin St. Louis is really influenced in his mentality by the way hockey is taught in the U.S., and having someone who's aligned with that would probably fit with what he's trying to do. That's more like I think that's why Adam Nicholas and him, even though they've got very different personalities, they find a way to make it work well, is because they've got some similar ideas. And so maybe, I don't know. So I think I would be looking more towards the US. But do you want a coach that would be focusing on the PK, for example, or is it somebody who would have completely a different profile?
Well, I mean, if we're looking for experience,
yeah,
and playoff experience specifically, then I think those other things are probably basically the Canadians, and does Martin St. Louis himself want a mentor? Is he someone who wants to mentor? And I don't know the answer to that question, honestly. Does he need a mentor? I don't know the answer to that question either, but I do think that coaching an NHL club is very different in the playoffs than it is in the regular season. I also think that Martin St. Louis, having played as much in the playoffs as he did, knows that and has his own ideas of I'm sure he second-guessed many of his coaches' decisions or challenged them on him or whatever. I mean, it's, he does have some experience, just not the guy actually making the decisions. So I agree with what you're saying. It's actually a very interesting point, the whole USA Hockey angle, and I don't think you're wrong. But if the prime objective is to add someone with experience to help guide this club once it needs that guidance, then, looking in a specific box really limits sort of the candidates that you can look at when, I mean, someone like Jacques Martin, for instance, before he went to Ottawa, could have been a guy, would have been a great guy to work on the penalty kill, and would have been just a guy to actually do literally the exact role he was hired to do in Ottawa originally. Would have maybe been perfect. And maybe that's a way to do it, that you don't actually add a coach to your staff. You do what Ottawa did, not fire the coach and replace him with Jacques Martin. But initially what they did, Jacques Martin was brought in as a coaching consultant, someone that DJ Smith could go to and discuss things with and bounce ideas off of. And maybe that's simply maybe that's simply what they could do, as opposed to altering the actual coaching staff itself.
Yeah, but Marty strikes me as someone who's very confident in his own ideas. And maybe, I won't say that he would feel threatened, but I'm not sure that he would risk bringing in a guy that would feel like he's yesterday's coaching, whereas he wants to bring fresh ideas and move things forward, and not necessarily turn or surround himself with someone that would have views that are more maybe traditional. And I don't want to make it sound like it's derogatory, but I don't know. It's even delicate to bring it up with him, because it would look like second guessing his own assistants, and I think that he trusts his assistants, all of them.
He does.
So
yeah.
So
he does.
Anyway, we'll see.
He's loyal to them. He's as loyal to them as he is to Michael Pezzetta. So another question here comes in from Daniel Nguyen, who is a fan of the podcast. Thank you, Daniel. His question I found interesting. He says, if you look back in some other teams' histories, it sometimes took one offseason, one draft, or one move to single-handedly transform the franchise for a generation without even having to draft a generational player. I can use the example of the Ducks with their 2003 draft, where they drafted both Corey Perry and Ryan Getzlaf in the same draft. The Sharks trading for Joe Thornton. The Bruins with their 2006 offseason, drafting Kessel, Lucic, and Marchand, and also signing Chara as a free agent. Or the Stars with their 2017 draft, Miro Heiskanen at 3 overall, but Jake Ottinger later in the first round, and Jason Robertson, I believe, in the second round. So looking at the two off seasons that Hughes has had, do you feel like they have the potential to have similar ripple effects? If not, what do you think needs to be done to have such a summer?
It's interesting that he brings up the Boston Bruins, because that crazy summer was all organized under the tutelage of one Jeff Gorton.
Yeah.
After Mike O'Connell had been fired, and that was and as higher management in Boston were looking for a permanent replacement, they finally decided to hire Peter Chiarelli.
Yeah, who was hired already but wasn't allowed to be at their draft table or take part in the Chara signing because Chiarelli was coming from Ottawa. And so that whole thing was very
But to that list, you have to add also that they also traded for Tuukka Rask against Andrew Raycroft.
Yeah.
That's another thing that was a completely crazy offseason for the Bruins. One thing that strikes to me is that none of those teams, bottomed out. There's no full rebuild type of situations there. San Jose did not win a cup, but they certainly had many productive years with Joe Thornton. As for Dallas, I think it's crazy. It changed their organization in 24 hours. Those 3 draft picks. I don't think that the Canadians, it's too early to really say if the Canadians have already done that. And I think a lot of it hinges upon future performances from Kirby Dach. But I think it's
that was those 20 minutes apart. Those 2 guys were added to the organization. So that's got the makings of something like what Dane is referring to here.
Yeah, but Slaf's the first overall player, so it's not.
Yeah, but I don't think he's going to be a generational player. He's not saying without drafting first overall. He's saying without even having to draft a generation. Heiskanen was the 3rd overall pick. It's just an infusion of talent in one swoop. So basically, it would hinge on Slaf becoming what he seems to be becoming right now, Dach becoming what he looked like he was becoming, and then some of the other pieces from that draft hitting.
Hudson.
Hudson, Owen Beck, perhaps. It's the two. There's 2 building blocks there for that first draft of this administration to be that for this organization. But yeah, Engstrom was in that draft as well, the 3rd round pick. We'll see what happens with Meshar. Anything's possible, and Beck is a bit of a wild card as well. But if Hudson becomes special, if Slaf becomes special, and Dach becomes special, not generational, but just really impactful players, then I think that first draft could potentially be that for this administration. Yeah,
and happen in Montreal.
And it haven't happened in Montreal, when the entire building wanted them to draft someone else.
Yeah, that's true. A little bit of revisionist history there, but it'd be phenomenal. I think that's what they have to hope for, because you could tell that even though Jeff Molson's been comfortable in using the word rebuild, below him, Jeff Gorton and Kent Hughes have been trying to find accelerators so that they don't have to bottom out and be like the worst team in the league for 5 years and try to draft top 3 for 5 years in a row before they start doing something relevant. So in the way that they went about their business, getting that sort of magic happening and getting that sort of quick turnaround would really be a major, major key. So there's certainly that there are more pieces to the puzzle that need to be added, significant pieces. But if what you describe with Dach, Slavkovsky, and potentially Hudson all in the span of a day, basically, that could make a big, big difference down the road. That's a fun exercise. I like that.
Yeah, that's good. But it is good to point out there are other ways to become competitive, and it's also worth pointing out that only one of the teams that Daniel mentioned actually won a Stanley Cup, which would be Boston, obviously.
Well, no, Anaheim won a cup in 2007.
That's true. Anaheim won a cup. Yeah. That's true. You're right. Yeah. My bad. And the Stars might very well win one soon.
And they went to the finals. The other 2 teams went to the finals, so that's not too bad.
Yeah.
Although, on Twitter, there's Jeff M that says, in terms of building out the future roster cap-wise, do they lock in Slavkovsky and Guhle for 8 years extension this summer? How much would it take for each, and also for Xhekaj? That's an interesting question. For one thing we can say regarding Slafkovsky is that the Canadians and Cole Caulfield waited after his entry level was done before they went on to negotiate. So it's not because the team wants to sign a player as soon as he is eligible for a new contract that it's naturally going to happen. Sometimes it will. Guys will, lock in as soon as possible, but in many cases, they will consider that it's in their best interest to play out that third year and show that they're even more valuable to their team than what they've shown in the first 2 years. So they'll prefer the ELS, the entry level to finish before they sign that second contract. So Slafkovsky, if you consider the steps that he's taken from his second year compared to the first, well, he would have every right to say, well, you like my second year, well, wait until you see my third one. Yeah. And because it's going to be another huge step, and then the number would be different. The problem for Montreal, though, and for any team, is that usually for talented young players, the longer you wait, the more expensive it gets. So,
yeah, and so that's really what's at play here. The one thing is that Ken Hughes' predecessor, Mark Bergevin, signing Nick Suzuki to his current contract, and Cole Caulfield sliding in just under it, creates a bit of a template for Slafkovsky at some point, whether that's this offseason, whether that's next offseason. You don't necessarily have to stay under Nick's number, but I'm sure the Canadians are going to try and sell a vision to him that, listen, Nick's our captain, he's our leader. If we just all stay around that number, we can really build something special here. Whether Slafkovsky and his agent, Jerry Johansson, agree to that, that remains to be seen. I mean, that's the wild card. And so by waiting, I could see him, if they wanted to sign Slaf to a contract, let's say this offseason, so an extension, which would kick in after next season.
Yeah.
And say, listen, we'll give you 8 times 7 million or 7.5, let's say. Would they go for that right away? That would be cashing your chips right now, not knowing what Slaf will do next season. So there'd be an element of risk for both sides. Maybe Slaf does not pick up where he left off. Maybe he doesn't continue playing the way he does. But I think that's kind of what it would look like based on if you're going to sign him for 8 years. You can also bridge him. There's all sorts of other options you can do. But if you're going to bridge him, then there's no point doing it right away. The only way I think the contract gets signed this summer is if it's an 8-year deal. And if it's in the neighborhood, at least, of what Suzuki and Caulfield signed for. Which is bonkers to even think about when in November it was whether he would be sent to Laval or not. So, but I think that's the reality of the situation right now, especially if Slaf continues playing the way he has. The framework of his contract is already it's in black and white on the Canadians' ledger already. So I think he would have to accept something. Probably less than Cole, because frankly, Cole was more accomplished over his entry-level contract than Slaf has been so far, which is why I think Slaf would probably have some interest in waiting another year and doing it again and betting on himself and then seeing if he can get himself a really big contract.
Well, if he continues on that progression, the Canadians would be happy to pay more because it means that they've got a better player. There is an element of risk in giving him a lot of money based on a limited sample size of half a season, but you don't have to take that risk because you got that whole third year. So and also the other interesting situation is that with the cap moving up, there's going to be natural inflation that'll keep growing. There'll be new guys that are finishing their entry levels that will sign for new, very significant amounts out of their ELC. And they're bound to take the most money probably that's available out of that extra available money under the cap. It's the second contracts that really take the cake these days. But I wonder how long the Canadians will be able to keep that internal cap of you don't make more than Suzuki. And I think that this is.
I agree.
I think it's about to be broken. I think, and Slafkovsky, if he continues like that, and they waited for a third year at the end of his entry level, he would probably earn more than Suzuki and Caulfield.
Well, the number with Suzuki and Caulfield is not the 7.875 and the 7.85. The number with Suzuki and Caulfield is 9.4. They each take up 9.4% of the cap this season. Suzuki was a bit higher when he signed his deal. Cole is exactly 9.4. Next season, the cap going up, as you mentioned, to 87.5. 9.4% of that would be 8.225. So if I'm...
Yeah, and you actually have to look at how much it would take. It would go up this season after that.
Exactly. Which is, it's
so if you maintain,
it's projected to get to about 92 the season after that. So you're talking like from a cap percentage perspective, you could respect the Canadians' internal cap while going over Suzuki's actual dollar figure. Because it'd be easy to say, well, when Suzuki signed that, he signed for this percentage of the cap, so we are willing to sign for a little bit less than that, but it'll still be more from a dollar perspective.
Yeah, that's a popular way of looking at it.
That's how agents look at it. That's how agents look at it today, for sure.
Yeah, it's cap percentages.
Yeah.
So
as far as Guhle goes, I don't know if Guhle's contract is in the same category, but definitely there are some comparables. Particularly, I mean, you know, I don't know to what extent he's comparable to a Jake Sanderson. Probably not. But there's I think I can't get a handle on what, but I think the Canadians would like to see Guhle play another season before getting into that. Personally, that's my view. What,
because of his play or because of his because of his health?
Because of his, I don't know. I mean, that's nothing that. But if you use Jake Sanderson as an example, and the Senators signed him, prior to the season, they signed him to an extension with 1 year left on his ELC, the way Guhle will have at the end of this season, and it's it was an 8-year deal at $8 million a year, $8,050,000. So. That's, I think, what I'd like to see from Guhle is like what's the offense going to be from him. So I think Jake Sanderson has an element of offense to his game that got him that contract. Guhle is still developing, and it's not quite clear where that's going to go. So I would want to see that from both sides, from the Canadians' perspective and from his own perspective, because he's going to get paid more as a guy who produces points. He never has been a guy who produces points, even though he seems to have the tools to do it. He's never really done it, and that's the big question mark, because points get you paid. That's the reality. And so you're probably talking about the difference between a $6 or $7 million a year contract on a long-term deal, or something like what Sanderson signed for, based on how you're going to produce offensively.
Yeah, it's a matter of opportunities, and in Guhle's case, I mean, it's funny because we're about to talk about Xhekaj's contract, and Xhekaj has been the one getting some reps on the second power play, at different moments in the season.
Mm-hmm.
But Guhle, if he was given that opportunity on a regular basis and with a healthy lineup, probably the PP2 would look better than its current iteration. He would be able to put up more points, but I don't think that we can expect that Guhle will ever be a PP1 type of guy, because he's got so many more responsibilities that increases ice time that he won't be given the keys to the power play anytime soon. Not with Matheson, and if Hudson makes it down the road, here's another guy who would prevent that from happening. So I think that there's what's challenging for a guy who has not shown that he could put up points a lot on a consistent basis is that when you're very good defensively and you face top opposition, it means that 5-on-5, you're not only going to neutralize the best offensive elements on the other side, but you're going to generate points yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a tall order.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but with Xhekaj, I don't know what he's going to, he has to be signed at the end of this season.
That's it. That's interesting.
I think the way his season's gone would make both sides agree that a bridge deal is what makes sense here. So I think a 2 to 3 year deal. But I mean, you look at how the Canadians have handled the Newhook deal and the Doc deal. Both of whom were RFAs, both of whom had question marks around them, and they each got 4-year contracts at pretty reasonable numbers. So maybe they make that sort of hybrid decision with Xhekaj, where they give him a 4-year deal, 2.5 a year, 3 a year, somewhere in that range, and say, okay, now you got 4 years to, we're committing to you for 4 years. Now go out and show us that we're right. I could see them doing that. I mean, that would make sense.
There's an opportunity for a bargain there for the Canadians.
Yeah,
somewhere around the 3rd year, or
yeah. But I mean, that's their pattern is just as their pattern with Caulfield. Maybe should educate how they'll handle the Slafkovsky situation, where they would wait until his contract runs out. Maybe what they did with Doc and Newhook could educate us as to what they might do with Xhekaj.
All right. Well, we'll wrap this up for today, Arpen.
Yeah.
I hope everybody liked today's episode. Don't hesitate to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. You can also listen to us watch us on YouTube if you're listening through an audio version of our podcast. So don't forget, you can subscribe also to the SDPN channel on YouTube. So we'll be back on Friday. So some hockey to be there. It's a practice week for the Canadians.
Practice week, yeah. They got Buffalo. It's a weird week actually. You got Buffalo, and then the back-to-back Buffalo Pittsburgh, and then an afternoon game in Jersey on Saturday. So,
that's weird.
A strange week, but definitely a lighter week. But we'll be back on Friday to talk about those 2 games and whatever else happened this week. So we will talk to you then. Until then, have a great week.
And future Friday, we might have a surprise for you.
Oh.
All right, everybody. See you around. Bye-bye.